Good afternoon. This is Anita Kaniaya, and I'm from the Freedom Project India. TFP India is our organization. I'm based in Bangalore and have done a lot of work with children and begging, which is why I think Shantanu has asked me to kickstart this. I've had the privilege of working with so many of you on the call, not on the call, but will watch the recording. And it is a privilege to be able to work in this sector and to be able to rescue and rehabilitate women and children who have been trafficked. So let me begin with the presentation and sharing screen. Yeah, all right. So today's session is on forced beggary, which is a form of trafficking that many of us see, but we think it may not be trafficking because it is so visible. And today I'm going to be addressing children being forced to beg, particularly not the larger circle of people whom we find begging at traffic light junctions. So just to give a little bit of a background as to how this started and how I got into this and what is being done by governments across different states. There have been various operations to rescue children or to begin to understand why children are begging on the streets. And I think I've listed some of them. 2011 was the first one that Karnataka state did, which was called Operation Rakshane. And we rescued 300 children. When I say we, I was then part of Oasis India. Shantanu was the boss. And I helped to work with the police and with the Government Department of Women and Child Welfare to look into why children were on the street begging, and that was titled Operation Rakshane. Subsequently, I think governments across India in various places began looking at how do we tackle this issue of children begging at traffic light junctions? Is there a relationship between begging and trafficking? Are these children really from local communities, as most people think? Or could there be a possibility that they have been kidnapped, they could be missing from some other place, and they're on the street begging because they've been forced? So I think Operation Smile was really birthed across India. I know that, the Andhra and Telangana did quite a bit on this, but so did Karnataka. We had 3 Operation Smiles, which was really the government working with the local municipality and with Department of Women and Child, with the police, with NGOs to find out how can we tackle this issue of children on the streets begging. So that's to give a little bit of a background. My journey started with this in 2004-05, when we began to see so many kids on the street. Everywhere you drive, you'd see kids begging at traffic light junctions. You'd see gangs. We used to, in fact, call them Rajasthani gang, or depending on which language they spoke or how they were dressed, because there were so many adults and double the number of children with them. So whether they were babies, often sleeping, or whether they were people on the roadside doing tricks, that there were always kids begging. And my journey began in 2004-05, really to look into why children were on the street. And then in 2011, we had the privilege of working with a police cop who was fantastic at masterminding this Operation Rakshane. So basically, I have classified children begging on the street into 2 categories, just out of the work that we have done and out of all of the operations that were carried out. So the first one is children who are being forced to beg by third parties. This is, there's no relationship between the child and the adult or the person that they're begging with. So they may be criminal gangs, they may be networks, they may be people who are who have loaned the child, and therefore someone else is using the child to earn money. They could be friends of the children, or they could be distant family members, but they're really not related to the child. That's the first category. The second one is when the child is being forced to beg by the so-called parent or guardian themselves. And here, usually the children are forced into begging really, sometimes they say to substantiate the family income, or but the threat they've been pulled out of school or they've been refused admissions to school so that they can earn money. And usually there's a lot of psychological threat and violence as well. So they're beaten or they're starved if they don't do this. So those are the two types of begging. When we see children on the street, they're usually categorized into these two. So this is a type of coding that we used when we did the rescue operation. And I thought I'll share this because, when you see a child begging on the street and you wonder, okay, is this child, related to the person or not? And you don't know that till you actually rescue the person. And even after rescue, we found, unless we really look carefully, some of the documents being presented also may not be really, you have to look beyond that. And I'll share a story later. But we made these classifications. For example, a lot of the children, when they go begging, usually have a picture of a god, and then they have a plate and then they will ask for money, or they show you a disability, like a part of skin that is burned or an abnormality, that they're born with. Single begging, we put that because sometimes the child is alone. There's no adult, no person, seemingly, whenever we've done the survey. Then you have group begging, where there's it looks like a family or looks like a community begging. Or you have kids who perform on the streets. They do stunts, like they go in and out of a ring or walk a tightrope, which we have seen in Bangalore, may be different in other places. Or there are kids begging with adults, usually babies, infants, children who can't yet talk. They will be carried around and the adults beg. Children showing injuries, children selling goods, asking for food or money. So as operations increased, the traffickers, as well as the adults and the children, realized that you can't come and ask for money straight away, or you may get picked up. So they begin to sell something and then ask for the money, or they begin to come and say, I'm really hungry, and can you have something? Can you give me something? And finally, an adult who's begging, holding an infant. And many times we have realized, and I'm sure you have too, that the children sleep. They sleep, and they continue to sleep through the day. So this is Operation Rakshani in 2011, where it was a citywide operation. And this is what taught me the most I know today about trafficking and begging. Children being forced to beg. So I think it was a 3-month surveillance. We started in September and did the rescue in December. But when I say we, it was 7 different organizations, NGOs. Then there was the government, there was the police, there were all the departments that were called. And if you really want to know how well this was organized, there is a YouTube video called A Handful of Dreams. I will refer to a part of that video today, but this is that operation that was done in December 2011. I think even on, it was widely telecast on breakfast television across India. And there were about 1,000 children that were surveyed during those 3 months. So during the 3 months, the NGOs were tasked with taking a photograph of every child that was begging at the traffic light junctions. So then they collected the information, then it was documented. And finally, there was a decision taken on a particular day to do an undercover covert operation. And so on, in December, 300 children were rescued on that day. Now, what I want to share is, the story of how this happened, and a few stories to just show you how much of an impact this made, not just on me and on our organization and all the people involved, but even we got to hear and see things which we never imagined. So I'll come back to the story. Now, when we look at children and we wonder, why do children beg? Why are children being on the streets? Why are they not in school? Why does this issue not go away? Why is it prevalent across India when all of us know that this is not right, that this is a crime? And there are many public people who think that too. So just sharing a few causes and a few questions against that. Primarily, children are trafficked. So begging is a form of trafficking because the children are forced to do something they never agreed to, they do not want to do. So if you look at the definition of trafficking, it means that you are forced to do something that you never agreed to, and then you are not allowed to get out of that situation. So, The question is, what about anti-trafficking programs? What about the HTU? What about organizations that are working in this? Why are children still on the streets begging? Poverty and hunger. When we started off first I've been in this for, I complete 20 years next year. And when we first started looking at this issue, we all thought it must be poverty, it must be hunger that's driving the kids to the streets in terrible conditions, But then you look at what is the response of adults when they see this happen. How come children who should be protected are not? Forced to do so by adults in authority. And I've spoken to this earlier, that this is one of the main causes. Children by themselves do not want to be on the streets begging. They definitely want to be playing, or they want to be doing something which they enjoy, and begging, or in the middle of all this traffic, being forced by these adults, going hungry, being tired, no water. That's not something children choose to do. So there is definitely a child rights violation. Cultural and traditional practices. This refers to a lot of the cultural and traditional practices that are impacting other forms of trafficking. And I'm sure others will cover this as well. But how about awarenesses to break these harmful practices? So when we're doing awareness, let's not just refer to one form of trafficking or one form of cultural or traditional practice. Often we talk about the Devdasi system, which is a very cultural practice. But how do we include even children being forced to beg in the awareness sessions that we do? Gender and minority description. Often we find that there are more girls than boys. I'm sure that, all of us watched that movie Slumdog Millionaire years ago and thought it was horrible, but it was very real and very true. And they show more boys. But my experience, and I'm sure others will also vouch for this, is that there are more girls, because somehow girl children are easier to control than the boys. And so, we've seen it happen time and time again, that among children, girls are more vulnerable than boys. Not to say that boys are not, but if you look at the gender, and if you look at the discrimination, it is more against the girls. Fraud and coercion. Often children, like I mentioned earlier, do not choose to do this. They are kidnapped, they are held, they are threatened. And I will share a story of what the girl tells about how she was, kept in this begging racket for so many years. I've said lax laws because I didn't want to really, it's not the laws that are lax, but it's the enforcement of the laws that is quite lax. I mean, you can do a rescue, or you can pick up the child who's begging and take them to the police station, and not much happens. Somebody turns up, somebody says, I'm the adult who's caring for this person, and the child is let go of. Lack of awareness amongst enforcement agencies. Even though there are so many of us doing trainings, and there is so much of training that's happened, so many SOPs that have been released, there's so many things that are in place, yet this is still going on. So what happens is, when somebody wants to do something, the question is, okay, if I pick the child up, or if the child is taken off the street, what next? And I will address parts of that in the challenges as the last topic in today's training. Children with no parental care. We've had cases of children who were rescued and who we realized, were actually street kids, and the father had gone, the mother had passed away from a disease, and the children were really care of the footpath or the pavement. And so they grew up there, they live there, they don't know anything else. How do you eat? How do you earn any money? That's why they beg. So then we need to look into long-term care and protection. What can we do? The biggest one, I think, is lack of community support, because we can end up doing rescues, or we can end up picking the kids off the street, but how do we form a community around them that will care for them and that will keep them off the street, and that will look into rehab options? So I've said, what about NGOs? How can we partner together? And I'm glad that I'm kickstarting today's series of trainings, because I think this is a fantastic platform for us to ask the questions of ourselves, ask the questions of agencies that we work with. How can we do it more collaboratively together? I'm talking today about some of the hardships faced by children who are forced to beg. And we see this and we know this, that they're often abused and exploited. They're exposed to harsh environments. We've seen kids who've burned, whose wrists were broken, and they were forced to hold a begging bowl in the middle of, both those hands, crippled, burnt. The traffickers source go out looking for these kind of children who not are unwanted, but really are a burden on families, especially if they come from, families from rural areas where poverty is an issue. A lot of the kids who object, who play around, who are playful, they are forced into submission. Physically, mentally, they are tortured. And many times, if it's a girl child, then sexually, even boys have been so badly sexually assaulted and tortured into continuing to do that, because that abuse then leaves them, just so scared of doing anything against the trafficker or against the adult who's assaulting them. There are severe restrictions on their movement and their interactions. So when we did the rescue, prior to that, we were taking pictures of them interacting with the children in a non-threatening way, trying to find out who these children were. And they were so scared, because often there'd be an adult that would walk up to us and say, why, what are you asking the child? What do you have to do with the child? And you realize then that the children that we see seemingly alone are really not. They're being watched very carefully. Addicted to solvents, alcohol, and drugs. This one we all know. When we finished that rescue, those 300 children, I think about 40 were infants. And some of those infants didn't wake up till the next day. They were so drugged. They said cough syrup and other things, but I don't know what keeps a baby sleeping through everything. And we've seen with the begging gangs that you will always see the child sleeping at these traffic light junctions for hours together. The child will be sleeping as they continue to beg the adults. Severe restrictions on movement and social interaction. I've already referred to that. I think that's a double reference. What are some of the violations they suffer? So those are some of the hardships, but really there's a difference between violation and hardship. And I want to refer to that as we go through today, to say that a lot of times we don't realize, and we see someone beating or we think, okay, that's the parent. How do I interfere with this? But just imagine if we're looking at children and being forced and traffickers and religious teachers or parents, they exploit them. First of all, that kid is on that street for hours. Sometimes they finish. We've been on surveillance where begging gangs have been picked up close to 12 a.m., midnight, and the children have no control over this. We've also seen that the money that is earned by the child, it is collected periodically, and then they continue to beg. So those forcing them to beg, they do things to the children which is not right, which is a violation, which is a crime. It's not just a hardship, but it is a crime. And this is why I think that we shouldn't be quiet about this, even though it's so visible, it's in the face, we can do something about it. We don't end up doing it because we don't realize the things that are happening. Verbal abuse, you'll often hear them being shouted at. Physical abuse, slapped around, beaten, burnt. And then, of course, the sexual harassment that goes on. The children who are being forced to beg by gangs, by people who do not belong to them, they live in dangerous conditions. When we did a rescue, and again, I'll show that video a little later, but the children were lying in plastic tents. There were dogs, street dogs. There were like a pack of 14 dogs. We went out after 11 p.m. The children were alone, left to lie in their urine on the mud in plastic tents. There was no adult sleeping with them that night. The dogs could have walked in and mauled those kids, and they were below the age of 5. So dangerous conditions. Forced child begging can also prevent children from getting an education. And this one is where the Right to Education Act should come in. Because we're always looking at what do we put in the FIR, but what about the fact that these children have not had an education? They're not being sent to school. How do we not bring that in? And I think these are all questions for all of us to think about and consider, what can be done. So here's my first case study, Anjali. So Bangalore Mirror on October 4th, I think 2016, covered a story about a child who was begging at a bus stand, and she was beaten by an unidentified man in broad daylight. The child, I think, was in the article said to be about 4 years old. She was beaten so badly on the head. I don't know if you can see pictures in my presentation. I can't see the picture. Can you see a picture? Can someone tell me if you see a picture of Anjali?
I can't see it.
You can't see it. Okay. For some reason, it's choosing not to do that. Okay. So yeah, she was beaten with a steel tumbler. So as that adult was beating the child with the tumbler, there was no one who stopped her. There was no one who stopped the man from doing it. And then I think a few people questioned him, and then he left the child at that. And by the time she was bleeding quite badly from the head, and then she was transferred to the CWC. But then we went on and we were able to meet with the social worker, and we took the case on and realized that the child came from KGF, Kolar, and she was 6 years old. I think that's what we found out. She went to a government school. She could name her mom and her dad, and she gave us enough information for us to be able to go to Kolar and actually find the parents. Maybe I should just share the video of Swapna, and I'm going to try and, as you watch the video, figure out if I can get the pictures to show up. So let me give a little bit of background. I think this video is really impactful because whatever I've shared so far, this video will bring out even more. So it's got this, Swapna is part of the Handful of Dreams video. I've just cropped her story out for today. It's 8 minutes, and I'm going to be, sharing how her story has impacted our journey with trafficking and with children being forced to beg. And as you look at her in 2011 in the video, I'm going to show you some pictures of her today and what she's doing to say, even if we made that little bit of a difference, it counts. So let me share the video.
One of the children rescued was a 9-year-old girl called Swapna. Swapna was found begging at the Nagavara junction. This is a child who has been forced to beg since she was 5 years old.
While coming back at Nagavara junction, we found this girl begging with a picture of a god, and there was also a lady with a baby begging there. And we are here at this convent where we are hoping to keep Swapna for the night, and we will produce her and the other lady with the baby before the CWC.
పొద్దున్నే 3 గంటలకు ట్రైన్లో పోయి మిస్టిక్లో దిగి మొత్తం నాకు వస్తుంది.
ఒక రోజుకి ఎంత డబ్బులు వస్తుంది?
ఒక రోజుకి 200, 300.
ఇంట్లో ఎంత ఇవ్వాలా డబ్బులు?
250.
నువ్వు ఇవ్వకపోతే మీ నాయన ఏం చేస్తాడు?
కొడతాడు.
Another child rescued was a 5-year-old boy called Varun. This child was found with his father, who was forcing him to beg.
ದಿನ ಭಿಕ್ಷೆ ಬಿಡ್ತೀಯಾ? ಇಲ್ಲಿ ಆ ಕಾಸು ಯಾರು ಕೊಡ್ತೀಯಾ? ಏನ್ ಮಾಡ್ತಾರೆ ಕಾಸು? ಕುಡಿತಾರಾ? ಏನಾಗ್ತೀಯ ದೊಡ್ಡನಾದ್ಮೇಲೆ? ಹೌದಾ? ಏನೇನು ಆಸೆಗಳಿದೆ?
Varun was released to his mother, who came to the CWC court the following day. He was overjoyed to be reunited with his mother. This lady assured the CWC team that Varun would be sent to school regularly and that he would not be forced to beg again. It seemed like a happy ending. But the question is this: will Varun be back again on the streets begging? Swapna requested to be placed at the child's home where she was first taken after being rescued. She seemed to be settling into the home where she made a few friends. She also started going to a local school with the other children from the home.
And she's very much interested. She's very friendly. She mixes with, though she is a big girl among all the other children, she has well adjusted in the school and she's happy.
Swapna's rescue, however, was short-lived. When her social workers took her to the CWC court, her parents were there, waiting to take her home. They mounted an aggressive defense and demanded Swapna's immediate release. The CWC team didn't have enough evidence to indicate whether or not these were Swapna's parents. But while the paperwork was being processed, one of the CWC members recognized Swapna's father from a previous case where he got 3 boys released, claiming they were his sons. When confronted, he admitted to having got the other children released. Swapna, moreover, seemed hesitant to go back with her parents. She then told the CWC team that the man who claimed to be her father forced her and other children like her to beg. She went on to claim that this man wasn't actually her father, and she was willing to take the CWC team to the place where the other children were held. Based on the CWC team's information and the information given by Swapna, the couple was then handed over to the police.
నువ్వు డబ్బులు ఇస్తావు కదా, అది మీ నిజమేనా? కాదు కదా?
మా సొంత నాయన మా అమ్మ చిన్నప్పుడే తీసుపెట్టి పాలు తాగే పాత తీసుపెట్టి వెళ్ళిపోయింది మా అమ్మ.
మీ అమ్మని చూసినావా నీకన్నా?
A rescue team comprising of social workers from Oasis, the police, and the camera crew then set off with Swapna, with the intention of rescuing the other children who were forced to beg by Swapna's alleged father.
The police have requested us on the information provided by Swapna to go out and rescue the other children whom Swapna says are also being forced to beg every day and give money to this man.
We walked through a couple of alleys to get to Swapna's house, which is a makeshift hut. We start looking for the children Swapna mentioned, but only find a lot of empty huts. Bright flashlights are turned on as we look inside each hut, but there's no sign of the children. Till one man standing nearby points us to the right huts.
We've rescued 7 children, all very, very young, and 5 women.
Thanks to Swapna, 7 children are rescued, and her handler is taken to the Yelahanka police station, where an FIR is booked against him. And finally, at the police station, the alleged mother confesses that Swapna is not their daughter.
We've also filed an FIR against 2 accused.
the so-called father and the grandmother of the girl Swapna. They have been booked in Yelanka police station. The rest of the people we are taking to the government home, and we will produce them before the CWC. We rescued these children from a really sad state. They were in plastic tents, and we've been able to take these children out of these situations, and we hope that they will get justice.
Swapna is now back at the child's home, and she seems settled in. She enjoys going to school, and now she's at a place where a 9-year-old's biggest worry is homework. Swapna, her name means dream. Her dream of going to school has now become a reality for her. All those involved in Operation Rakshane's first sweep would no doubt feel it was a good day's work just looking at where Swapna is today.
Words can never express this gratitude for what you have done, and it's so important that this is not the end and this is a beginning here.
Now that we have proved that this sort of collaboration and cooperation is possible, we would do more of this, not only in Bangalore, but also in other cities in Karnataka and in other cities of the country.
And also in Karnataka itself, the other districts also can take up systematically this program.
So Operation Rakshane hopefully is the first of many such sweeps that have happened. So I congratulate all the NGOs, the other departments and the police department officers for having done an extremely good work.
2 months. It's been 2 months since Swapna was rescued. Anita and Geeta from Oasis decide to visit her at the child's home.
It was really good to meet Swapna today and see just the difference that these last few months have made in her life. The day we picked her up, she had such a sad face, wouldn't even look up, and today she had a smile. She came running to hug us. This whole operation has been well worth someone like Swapna and her story, and the fact that she's got a new lease on life.
Swapna is just one of thousands of children that need rescuing. It's up to people like us to stand up and take responsibility to help more Swapnas get off the streets. It's time you and I resolved to help these children believe in their dreams. It's time for you and I to step up and give them a fresh start. It's time for you and I to help the Swapnas of Bangalore realize their dreams. It's time.
I want to become teacher.
With Swapna's story, I think you could see how the child describes everything that I have said earlier. So that's why I wanted to play that particular clip so you can hear it. The video was shot as it happened. So we didn't really stage too much. I think the bit that was, kind of visiting her at the end, which we shot on a particular day, planned. Nothing else was planned. Everything was as it happened. So her rescue, her being picked up, her speaking and saying things. Today, Swapna is 20 and she is in her first year of degree. She's doing BSc in, a BA in English Literature and Journalism, and wants to go on to become a social worker so she can rescue kids who are being forced to beg. So I think if you can make the difference in one person's life, this is it. This is the dream that all of us would have thought should happen. And with that one child, it has gone on to, be such an impact. So every child that we see on the street, if we can look into why and how and look into doing our best for them, then we should. So who are the key stakeholders? As we did this survey and as we looked into different things, we realized that the key stakeholders that really made a difference in the operation that we did, and subsequently for all the other operations, is the Department of Women and Child. They definitely were the nodal agency as we did the rescue operation. The police department, the Department of Health, Education, Social Welfare, all these departments came in as various parts. When the children were rescued, then their health checkups, the Department of Education looking into why those children were not in that particular taluk, or where they came from, why they were not in education, why they were not in the education system. And then Social Welfare, as we looked into schemes of how we can help the family and help the children who were genuinely, from poor backgrounds and did not know any other way. NGOs, Childline, because a lot of people call up to say, I've seen this child begging, what can I do about it? And then of course the Child Welfare Committee and their role in what can be done. So I think there is so much that we can talk about and discuss and, realize that there are things that we need to do. So here's steps that can be taken. So how do we create a convergence model that will address trafficking comprehensively? If we look at those key stakeholders, there's another, I think, resource that I should share with you, which the Karnataka State Department of Women and Child came up with a SOP, standard operating procedure for all forms of trafficking. I might have the PDF of the version, the English version, which I can share, and all of this data is there in that. It has, for every form of trafficking, a description, who are the key stakeholders, what are their roles, and what are the legal implications, and what can be used in the FIR, what are the provisions from the different acts. So I was talking earlier about a convergence model. How can we compile centralized data on this? So I know states do different things, and I know states have looked into how we can compile data for that particular state, but then there's a lot of movement. So these trafficking gangs, one month they will be, or a couple of months they're in Bangalore, then they move to someplace, Hyderabad, or they move next to each other. So we should really look to see how we can share data. So if it is centralized, we can share that data. Prosecution of the people who are forcing these children to beg. Even though this is so much in the open, we've hardly seen any prosecution go through. With Swapna, the two people who actually were her, traffickers, or were the people who were forcing her to beg, they were in jail for 10 months. 10 years, sorry. So they got the maximum. And I think that's important, that if it can happen with one case, it can happen again. How do we create strong, replicable rehab models? Rescue sometimes is easy, but then how do you rehabilitate them? What is it that we need to do for these children? Compiling and sharing success stories about best practice across the state. That's again very important, because I think that's what this forum will be fantastic for, is how do we compile and share the success stories and best practices. And I think that's what, Shantanu, I hope that this is one of the things that you aimed for, and that's what we're doing. We're sharing best practice, we're sharing our experiences in the particular topics that we have chosen to talk on. SOP on child beggary. We do have an SOP on child beggary, interventions and rehab based ones, which I can share. And just after this, I will share this presentation, and I will share any resource that I have on children being forced to beg. Awareness. A lot of awareness needs to be done with public, because sometimes people ask me, when I've gone for an awareness, they ask and they say, what do we do? We want to give the child something. You're saying don't give money because the money will not be given to them, or that they are being forced. Then what do we do? I think that is what we need to address in awareness. So often I tell them, give them food if they don't want food, because they know that food is not going to translate into money, which means then they may get beaten. So they keep asking for that. Don't give anything till we know for sure that this child is not begging for money or not begging for food, but really is being forced by someone behind them. Eradication of child beggary. I think if we all work together, we can make this happen. It is so visible. It has such simple solutions that we should be able to do this. We should be able to look into why and how. So what are some of the legal provisions against begging? I know I'm preaching to the choir, but I'm still going to share the ones that we have used and I think you should use too. So we have the IPC, and I will refer to the particular provisions under that, the Child Labor Act, the Immoral Trafficking Prevention Act, which really covers trafficking. So the Juvenile Justice Act. In Karnataka, we have a Beggary Act, which is hardly ever referred to. The bonded labor system, and there are other international treaties as well that look into this. So I'm just going to cover a few. Violation of child rights. The United Nations Convention on Rights of Children very clearly in its Article 36 states that all parties should protect the child against all forms of exploitation, which covers begging, which covers not being able to go to school. What does the JJ Act cover? With the amendments, I will refer to the particular sections, but it very clearly mentions a child who's found begging, or who is a street child, or who is a working child. So that is covered. The child is covered under these acts. And then the Karnataka prohibition of begging clearly says that any person found guilty of employing or encouraging a child to beg, there is an imprisonment that goes with this. What is the IPC cover? Well, like I said, 363 is the trafficking one. And so if we can prove that this child has been kidnapped or is being forced to beg or does not belong to the people who are forcing the child to beg, then we can definitely enforce this. And finally, the Commission for Protection of Child Rights definitely directs the Commission to examine all factors that include child begging that is thriving, that children are being maltreated, tortured, maimed, exploited. I think this commission clearly looks into that. So there are so many laws that we can. So here are some slides that go through specific sections. So in if we're looking at IPC, then it's 363A, 1, 2, and 3 are all ones that we can apply for children being forced to beg. What's the punishment? It is a cognizable offense and therefore non-bailable, and the imprisonment can extend to a period of 10 years. So, you know, when we were writing this up, we were thinking, why has this not happened more often? What does the JJ Act cover? Sections 1 and 2, employment of child for begging. For the purpose of begging, the person amputates or maims the child, or abetment of offenses under this section. And the punishment, it is a rigorous imprisonment. It can extend up to 5 years, and it has a fine of 1 lakh to 5 lakhs. So if the person has been found to have maimed the child, then that it attracts a 5 lakh fine and a 10-year sentence. So we should share this. We should create an awareness on this, even with the public, that even if they don't do anything, and if they can report the child that they suspect, then we can do something about it. And then, of course, the Karnataka Prohibition of Beggary Act. Let me come to this slide, which is the challenges. And as we discuss the challenges, you know, I might have some answers, but really, I think it is for us to think about. And I'd love to hear in the chat, perhaps, but after you watch the video, since there are few of us on this live call, but I'm sure many of you will watch the video later. And so maybe in the group, share what can we do to address these challenges, or are these challenges that you are facing? And maybe we can share, those who have gone through this can share, you know, what are some of the solutions. So first of all, pre-rescue, before we even think about how do we go about now getting children off the street, is to identify who are the stakeholders. I mentioned them earlier. You can look into connections that you have with them, and then define the roles. I will share that document which has their roles as well, because we've done so many operations rescuing children from forced begging that we've kind of figured out what works and what the system allows us to use. establishing the key stakeholders, their responsibilities, and deciding a nodal department. We have seen very often when the DWCD is the nodal department, then rehabilitation works better. But if the police are the nodal department, then the rescue side happens perfectly. So, deciding a nodal department and who takes responsibility will also decide where the budget comes from, especially if we decide to do operation across the city or across the state. Building consensus among the partners, this is so important because each of the partners, whether it's NGOs or whether it's the government department or the law enforcement, need to know who's doing what and how we can together address this issue. There's a meticulous building up of records, like I said, surveillance, the data collection, the photographs, the documentation of this, especially of the handlers, the adults who are seen with these children, is so important for us to be able to push through with FIRs and go through for convictions. Conducting the rescue in a way that allays the fears of public. Often, when you do the rescue, public will, because they don't know what's happening, they'll be like, why are you dragging that child? Maybe you're the trafficker. And so doing it in a way that does not give them doubt is very, very important. Post-rescue. Where should children be taken immediately after post-rescue? Now, that's a good question, because how many ever rescues we did, we found that some of the places that we took the children to were not really prepared to keep them for longer than what we had asked. Some of the cases of the children required that they stay for more than 2 days or 3 days that we had taken permission for. So where do we take these children to after post-rescue, where their medicals can be done, where we can just calm them down, where they can be fed? Those are important. The nature of the facilities that need to be made available at rescue centers. I think we have a whole list, a checklist of things that need to be put in place at rescue centers where the children will be taken. Identification of fit institutions. I think in the beginning, the first one that we did, we learned very quickly that we just can't choose children's homes. Some of them didn't have their licenses. There were so many issues that cropped up. So really fit institutions where the children can be sheltered. After the rescue, when and how should the police intervene to book the cases against the perpetrators? Because, when the rescues happen, oftentimes the perpetrators are not picked up, or the people who are on the street are really not the main people. So we need to delve into the case. Children often give us big clues, but that is when they begin to open up after a few days of this traumatic, being rescued, or when they settle down, then they give us very good clues. So we should be able to decide how and when the police need to intervene and help them as they go about their job. It's not for us to direct, but we can definitely say the first 2 days, let's ask again, let's look again as more and more pieces of information come through. Other issues or concerns or sections that need to be included in the FIR, apart from the ones that I've mentioned, which could be there, and then pursuing the handlers who have fled the scene and arresting them, and arresting the kingpins. They never are on the scene. So how do we get to them? And finally, following up the cases in trial, because we can rescue, we can pick up the child, but really going through the trial. Our trial for Swapna took 10 years. Her trafficker was released in 2021. Yeah, 2 years ago. And I remember they had called us for the trial and the final judgment, and he came out after 10 years and he just put both his hands together and he said, I will never do something like this. So whether it was the jail or whether it was the long time away, but we saw that come through in that one case. I think we're 10 minutes away, and I don't know if I should be asking for questions now, or how do we go about it, because we have a small audience. Should we just leave it for people who watch the video to post questions later? Is that how we should be going about this? I have no idea. I'm the first one, so everyone else can learn.
Yeah, first of all, amazing. Thank you so much for sharing, Anita. I know it's it's an everyday process. As a common man, we do see, and I think we've grown up seeing. So I think we are all immune to begging, and we feel so proud when we give 10 rupees, 5 rupees, and one, now the trend is when you share food with these people. But I think it's high time that we all stop by and ask the right questions and look deep. And yeah, you made me think that, campaigning against stopping begging is also very important. It was surprising for me to learn that Delhi government, they have a special toll-free number and a department that works against begging in all forms, by all men, people. But I think, yeah. So, I know I'm not expecting a right answer from you. I know it's some of these questions are something that we struggle with, but just wanted to pick your minds. What do you think, how should the public respond? And I ask this with keeping in mind the intensity or the frequency of cases we see. So should we, as a common man, should I stop and report every cases? Or, as a public, what would be your suggestion to me on what to do?
So like you rightly said, Chris, I do not have all the best answers, but I can give you the answers that I usually give, and I always get asked this question, what can we do? It's so cumbersome to report a case, even a single one. They have to get off, their normal duty, go to the police station or call up on the helpline number. And many times they say that, they're public, they're on their way to something. So they don't want something that's going to take a long procedure or a process. So yes, I do encourage them. First of all, don't give any money. I always say that don't give, because then that's going to stop them from, if money reduces or if people become aware that no, we have to stop all forms of begging, because child begging or forced begging is included in the other forms. If adults also are stopped from begging, then the children are not going to come on the streets. So definitely don't give any money. That's one awareness we need to create. Do not encourage any form of begging. I think the second one that I always tell them about is please report. If you can report it, then at least call the child helpline number, the 1098 number, call that number. Different states have different numbers now that are looking specifically at trafficking, depending on how active the state is with their anti-human trafficking units. So if that can be done, yes, I think we need to publicize numbers. If it is NGOs that are particularly working in this and they're happy to, take calls from public, then even that can be, put out. We've done different times where we have promoted different things with how public can report. Different forums. So we have the Child Protection Forum. We have the state has set up a forum here. So yeah, Chris, to answer you, if they can, please report it, and do not encourage begging.
Yeah. So now as an NGO perspective, and I mean, as a social worker, what should be our response? Should we deal with every child, let's concentrate on children. So should we deal with every child that we see on the road? Because I ask this also because I'm guilty. I've seen a ton, and then yeah, I did call Childline, and Childline would ask you what is the age, what is the color. I'm like, I don't know all of that. But anyways, I have reported, but I don't know the follow-up. So yeah, but I think it's high time that we could also work on this. Yeah. So what would be your suggestion as an NGO partner? Should we work on every case?
So just taking Swapna's case, right? It was an operation that began at 7 a.m. in the morning. And by 3:34, we were done. And we were driving back. So there was no kid on the street. Information had gone out that this operation was on the happening. And so by afternoon, in fact, there was nobody. here and there, somewhere we found. But this kid was begging on a main street, somehow main junction of one of the busiest roads, the ring road, the outer ring road. And we passed her. We were too tired and we were coming back right after the whole rescue operation. And then we stopped, made a U-turn and went back for the kid. And look where we are today. So Chris, it's a difficult one, but I think every child counts. And if we can do that, even if I'm traveling somewhere, I call someone else and say, hey, this kid is begging at this junction. If I could have shared photos, I have some great stories of having stopped for a child. There was once at the Tom's Bakery. It's a very famous junction in Bangalore. The bakery is very famous. And there was a kid lying on the side of the street, and the kid had a needle in the hand, had bandages, and the mother was begging, saying, my child needs a surgery. I've just discharged the child from the hospital, but the bandages and everything look very clean. So then I put her in the car and took her to the nearest police station. And we unbandaged, and they had stuck a needle in the hand, but there was nothing. And it was so horrible. So I'm thinking, of that one child, if I've missed that one child and I'm not reported it, and, because I'm looking at all the other difficult ways of handling the reporting, it always beats me that one child counts, Chris.
Yeah, so follow-up question would be like here in Hyderabad, we have pockets where I also understand that they are not the actual family members, but they are there all together. The police sees, everybody sees them. So now what do we do? Should we, and one of the Paradise Junction in Hyderabad, the whole pavement is occupied by these begging families, and all of them are from Rajasthan and they're here. And I actually reported once, and I don't see any. So what do we do when we see such migrating families begging? What do we do?
We've rounded them up. So with the police, we've rounded this Rajasthan gang. It puts them off forever. We've taken them all, irrespective of whether they were family or whatever, because they were, begging with the children. And it just continued on and on. Like you said, they occupy the pavement. They just occupy these traffic light junctions, and the kids were sleeping throughout. And then we realized that in that whole gang, there were two, I think, who were not part of anyone. And one was a deaf and dumb girl from Andhra with this Rajasthan gang. If she could write, and then she drew a train, and she told us, with all actions of how she was brought on the train. And then there was a baby that did not belong to the lady, because it took us about 4 hours in the police station. The child was below 6 months, and the lady refused to feed the child. The police even hit her, saying, you have to feed the child. It's a breastfeeding. Then she said, then we tried to take the baby from her to give milk, right, in a bottle. She caught the baby's neck, this lady. And then we were trying to tell the police, see, you got to look beyond the family that they look like or the community that they look like to see, are these kids really part of who they're supposed to be with? So yeah, I think we should do something with, it's not just the police who will act on this. The department needs to, the Department of Women and Child needs to, or social welfare, or, the people who are supposed to be looking into this issue of begging, so that we can address this issue more holistically. Labor Department.
Okay. You've given me homework.
Well, I hope that is, yeah. I mean, it's a tough thing with all the other forms of trafficking. This one is really tough, because I think you have to force everybody to see that this child needs to be off the street.
Yeah.
I think we're good for time. So thank you. Thank you for being patient. Your Saturday afternoon, the first one of the Saturday afternoons that we will be sacrificing for the good of the children and the women who really need us to be alert and active, so we can take more people on this journey with us. So thank you very much for this opportunity. And I'm sure that We'll hear more questions. And if you have experiences or thoughts, please share them in the group.